I just wanted to start by giving you a scale of the problem we're dealing with on the Humber estuary. This is the floodplain that we're looking at. It covers the estuary, but the tidal limits also reach down the River Ouse, the Trent, the Aire and the Don. We've got the whole of the city of Hull in the floodplain, the town of Goole, we've got major infrastructure and large significant amounts of very good agricultural land, which all have the potential to be affected by flooding. So there's two reasons for that large floodplain. One is that tidal flooding doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it involves significant volumes of water coming over the defences. And the other is the landscape. You can see an area across the middle of the map, which is an area of highland. Everywhere else around the Humber is extremely flat. When that water comes over the defences, it can travel a very long way. So you're not just worried about the defence in front of you, you're worried about defences possibly kilometres away. It's a system, and if you don't protect look after the whole system, you can't manage flood risk on the Humber. So I started in 2012, and we hadn't had a big flood since 1953, and we'd raised the defences around the Humber since then. And we were all talking about risk, and we were all looking at a strategy for managing it. And there's a big question that hung in the air. Are we being too risk averse? Is this really going to happen? Are we planning for something which is just too unimaginable? And then in 2013, we had the highest levels recorded on the estuary by some way. A huge flood, which affected over 1,000 properties on the Humber, affected other areas of the East Coast and significant areas of agricultural land. And it was something that we didn't really plan for. It was beyond what we looked at in terms of managing flood risk, and it completely changed our understanding and our evidence base on the Humber. This is the area just across from Goole on the tidal River Ouse, and that's actually a picture taken the next morning. In reality, the floodplain was much more extensive the night before. I'm going to give you a very quick whistle-stop tour of the landscapes around the Humber. This is Spurn Peninsula, which is right on the east coast and has the spit of Spurn extending into the estuary, and it does provide a flood risk function in terms of reducing the wave impact in the estuary. Moving west, this is Sunk Island. This is an area that was reclaimed from the estuary after the war. It's now used for agricultural land, very high-grade agricultural land, but extremely flat. Commercial, residential and industrial areas of Hull, all in the floodplain. A lot of Hull is actually below sea level. Back out to the tidal River Ouse, and again a flat agricultural landscape, and into Goole, where you can see the defences are much higher than the properties behind them that they're protecting. We have villages along the frontage, again with the defences much higher than the road. Industrial areas at Flixborough-on-the-Trent and down to Immingham. The docks at Grimsby forms part of the UK's largest port complex, and out to Cleethorpes and the beaches around Saltfleet and the Humberston area. So when you're considering how you manage flood risk on the Humber, you have to consider that the Humber operates as a system, an estuary system with estuary processes, and what you do in one part has the potential to impact another. So this is the traditional solution for managing flood risk, raising defences, and this is again the defence at Goole. But of course, if you do that, you prevent that water entering the floodplain. It stays in the channel, and it will simply come out of the system where there's a low spot in the defence. So you can't just decide, I'll build a defence to protect myself. You've got to consider what the impacts would be elsewhere. One of the ways we manage that is to look at flood storage sites. So instead of saying we'll raise the defences to protect ourselves, saying we'll take water out of the system to lower those in-channel water levels and reduce flooding elsewhere. This is the flood storage site at Orkborough, which is on the confluence with the River Trent. It only floods in very extreme events. The area is actually still farmed. And the other reason for needing a strategic approach is that the estuary is a designated site. It's a Ramsar site, and the presence of flood defences impacts the intertidal area. We're actually losing intertidal area as sea levels rise and the area migrates, and it can't because of the presence of flood defences. So again, it doesn't make sense to build a defence and then try and compensate for that habitat elsewhere. You need a programme-based approach, a landscape-based approach, and this is our managed realignment site just east of Hull, which provides some of the compensatory habitat we need to build and maintain defences around the estuary. The other thing that we need to look at is the acceptance that some places will flood. There's not enough funding to protect everywhere, and what do you do when it does? Instead of investing the money in reducing the probability, can you reduce money in reducing the impact of flooding, particularly on places like farmland? Can you look at business diversification? How do you get the water off the land? And we look at those kind of strategic approaches as well as reducing the probability. So a landscape approach to flood risk management wasn't something we'd really considered on the Humber previously. But as we worked through updating our strategy, it became clear that we needed to look at something more large scale that worked with the landscapes around the Humber. We actually got in touch with a gentleman from our Thames team, Richard Copas, from our National Environmental Assessment team, who'd done some work on the Thames looking at some of the things that we wanted to do here, and put us in touch with landscape architects, Kate. And I'll hand over to Kate to describe some of the work we've done.
Great, thank you, Laura. So one thing to bear in mind is that this project, which I'm going to sort of run through now with you, is all about stakeholder engagement, and it really proves that by using a landscape-led approach, in fact run by landscape architects who have the skills to produce the graphics and talk the talk about, actually allows multiple different types of stakeholders to agree on a strategy in a situation where there's very sensitive issues about land use, you know, which land is going to be flooded to allow other areas to not flood. It's all very, very sensitive, and there were lots of issues that could prevent a debate happening. Through the approach that we took with this project, we were able to pull all of those different stakeholders together. And as you can imagine, it started with a massive series of stakeholder workshops, lots of post-it notes, pulled together in this type of map, which is a compilation map of many of the ones that were used. There are 6 different local authorities in the area. There are all of the regeneration agencies, the NFU representing the farmers, individual landowners, all of the wildlife trusts, etc., etc. So you can imagine the scale of the operation. So we decided that it would be a project that looked at investment and that worked really as a sort of portfolio for that investment, a series of brochures, if you like. So although there's a lot of science behind this, that's not the way this project is presented. It's presented as a sort of glossy set of brochures. Each one of the flood cells that Laura introduced was a separate report. You can see a few of those down the side of the slide, and there was also an overview report explaining the whole thing. This is just to give you a bit of a sense of this is report number 26, very glossy as you can see. Lots of overviews and mapping and pictures. The focus each time, though, was on what are the drivers for change in that particular flood cell? So what's the local economy? And the emphasis of each document is geared towards whether it's more of a rural area or whether it's more of an industrial area, for instance. And behind it, as I said, there's the normal massive GIS exercise in producing all of the background evidence on landscape character, biodiversity, heritage. That's all for each of these flood cells in an appendix at the back of each report. And in fact, the landscape character and sensitivity side of it was a whole project in its own right, as you can imagine, pulling together all of the adopted landscape character assessments for this vast area and doing as a desktop exercise and pulling all of that together. The focus, though, needs to be on flood defence, and so we also pulled together the Environment Agency's own data on the different types of flood defence and the history of flooding in each flood cell, so that was a focus of each document as well. So up in the top left corner of this slide, you can see the 2008, an extract from the 2008 flood risk management strategy for the Humber for flood cell number 11, which is quite a technical little, quite dry, but with a lot of information. And imagine that page for this project has been opened up and described as a sort of 15 to 20 page report, which is just full of pictures. Completely different approach. At the focus, though, for each one of these reports is an opportunities map. And that was where really all the big stakeholder effort went. We decided that in order to have a set of reports that read individually and together so that people understood that the change made in one part of the estuary would affect others, we needed to have a consistent way of mapping it. So after much debate, we came up with this is a typical example of an opportunities map. All of the floodplain is described as flood-resilient farmland, so there's a set of strategies relating to that area. But particularly important is the green infrastructure emphasis of each one. So we looked at where we could encourage connections between settlements and the floodplain, encouraging people who are looking perhaps at the edge of the river all of the time to look back at that hinterland and look at the way that the floodplain influences what actually happens at the water's edge. So here, just briefly, you can see that there's a flood storage area, there's particular stakeholder, cycle routes, there is areas which are cross-hatched with a slightly darker green, and those are areas which we agreed with the local farmers could be targeted for more intensive agri-environmental schemes, where there might be freshwater wetlands as well as farmland, and they might be benefits from doing that. And alongside each one of those maps, we agreed the wording, which is really like a manifesto for this flood cell, agreed with all of the stakeholders involved. And then following that, we basically put together what we described as a series of magazine articles for each one of these flood cells. So this is examples of what's happening elsewhere in the country, what's happening in that area, and all the different projects which are going on. And in many ways, as part of when we looked at each flood cell, as well as looking at all the GIS and science behind it, just as important was looking at who the stakeholders were and what was happening now. So how could we take the existing activities and drivers for change, be it rail electrification schemes or redoing a landfill site or just new development, how could we take those and then use that as a catalyst for economic investment and perhaps improvements to the flood defences? So you can see that as part of this sort of magazine set of articles, there are little pictures in there as well, which is sketch designs to get people thinking beyond what they might have thought. That particular one is also demonstrating that perhaps in some places we shouldn't take the Transpennine Way all the way along the edge of the Humber. Strangely enough, it's the Transpennine Trail does go along the Humber, which is a little odd in terms of wording, but that runs along the north side. But in some areas, maybe it should be diverted inland because there are some parts of the estuary that are so important from a biodiversity point of view that we wanted to protect them. And that kind of, again, that strategic thinking about biodiversity has all come through, and it's not unique to this project, but this project provided a vehicle for explaining it and getting it out there and linking it with all the other strategies that are going on. I talked a bit briefly about the floodplain farmland, and the engagement with the NFU was a huge part of this project, very, very important to it. I think we all know about the importance of managing floodplain farmland more effectively in future. And as Laura explained, there are some parts of a big tidal estuary where it's really important that we can flood chunks of farmland very, very occasionally, perhaps. But it's also important to increase the attenuation capacity of that farmland, not least because there's also flooding on the fluvial systems coming down towards the Humber. So we started to look at various scenario planning, and we agreed this type of diagram, which is hypothetical. It doesn't relate to any particular piece of land, but this was agreed with the NFU. And that was really quite a big stepping stone and has led since to another project with the RSPB, which is looking at the evidence base for how, in fact, this type of temporary wetland creation could even be beneficial to farming. So I think it's small stepping stones all the way. Another example for Goole, which is the area next to the one I've just shown you. I'll go a bit faster now. This is flood risk management section of it, and here is the opportunity map, an equivalent one for an urban area. You can see that here the targeted environmental schemes are along the River Aire, but that there are also suggestions that there might be links across some of the rivers, actually on existing and future bridges, so that people can connect across on their bikes to both the area we just looked at, to the east, but also to the south as well, so that Goole isn't quite so trapped. Goole is a town that is looking for economic investment and ways to get that. It is protected by flood defence embankments, but it did flood. Those embankments need to be increased. But one of those embankments is right alongside the town centre, and as you can see, you already can't really see the rivers from the town centre. It's because you're looking at a flood embankment. Local people would want to maintain that park, but we know that we would need to increase the height of that flood defence. So this project enabled us to just do a very, very quick concept design scheme, to talk to the town council and to local stakeholders, to show them what type of, how you could redesign that local park with a much higher flood defence embankment and create a new shelter, create perhaps landmark sculptures that show the way the tide is changing on the river. This type of approach could give you a new jetty for riverside cruises. It could give you a new place for performance, for interpretation. This, we've looked at from the town. A shelter like this is designed to look almost like a ship on the horizon, and so people walking along the pathways, the riverside promenade, would almost look like they're floating. So it's very intriguing, but actually could provide quite an interesting place for people to go. It's created lots of interest. It's only a concept design. It was done very, very quickly, but it's just about getting the conversations flowing, getting people interested, getting people into a very positive, proactive investment mindset. Other parts of the estuary, this is an area called Far Ings, which is right up by the Humber Bridge in the centre of the estuary. In that part of the estuary, there's a lot of clay pits in the past, and these have become flooded, so they're freshwater wetlands. This particular area is a national nature reserve at Far Ings. You can see the Humber Bridge on the aerial view. And you can see that there's actually a managed realignment site called Chowder Ness, which is just on the left side of the photograph. But in fact, the whole of this nature reserve is at huge risk of tidal flooding and has already flooded once. It happens to be also the centre, the headquarters for the Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust. And although they knew that their site was being mooted as an area for a future managed realignment site, those discussions had not really taken place until this project came along. So by doing a kind of concept design exercise with them through this type of project, which they knew was part of a much more strategic exercise, it enabled those conversations to flow. And for us to start to say how actually this could be an opportunity. This nature reserve would of course become quite different. It would be an intertidal habitat, but perhaps you could have viewing towers, nature tourism. We connected it to another exercise for the area alongside, which I won't go into, which was all about nature tourism and cycling and getting on and off trains using the very tight network of rail links that there are in that area, which is a legacy of industrial activity in the past. Quite rightly, though, the Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust wanted to know, well, where would their wetlands go? So where would the compensatory freshwater wetlands be? And then through this exercise, we were able to start to give people a feel for various options. So not linking it to one particular landowner's land, but just giving a sense of the scale of the exercise that would be involved. And you can see that with the blue rings on that map. But also all the time showing examples of where it has happened in the past. So going to one of those areas, Winteringham Ings, which is on the New Ancombe River. And this is an area where there is a cement works right at the head of the river. So you can see how that flooded and how serious that would have been at the time of the 2013 floods. And then the opportunities map for that area, showing how the connections could be made around, and how new road developments, in fact, would have to be built around that CEMEX site. And then quick concept design sketches, as before, to try, in this case, to encourage local farmers to understand how they might diversify, they might benefit from the type of freshwater wetlands that the Far-Ings might bring. And then finally, looking at an urban area in Hull. So this is the site where there has been a vast amount of international investment. Greenport Hull is becoming the centre for wind turbine blade production and servicing. So the public footpaths that ran along this part of the estuary are having to be diverted inland, and you can see from that purple dashed line, that's an old railway line, so we're able to promote a way to take that path out and inland, perhaps connecting to other local towns, perhaps connecting to other heritage sites and opportunities for a new country park and new wetlands around the town of Heddon, which is just to the east. And here's the equivalent opportunity map for Hull. So you can see that in an urban area, that still same legend, that still same set of maps looks quite different, with a huge amount of allocated land for investment and development. But within, if I go back here, you can see perhaps the area just where all the dots are, in the, just sort of towards the left-hand side of the slide. That's the centre of Hull, and there is going to be a new cruise passenger terminal. The area just next to it is an area where in Hull there is one of the very few parts where there's residential development right down by the edge of the estuary. And of course there's a flooding problem for that residential development. It happens to be on infilled land, which is a former dock. So we looked at how we could increase the flood defence there, just as in Goole, but a quite different situation. Here it has to be a flood wall. And could we make that flood wall also a climbing wall, a play wall? Could it be the backdrop to increase biodiversity, which is what the Wildlife Trusts want in this area? Could there be a cafe building on the fact that the aquarium, the Deep, and this new passenger cruise terminal is going to be just along the edge here? Getting people to think differently about how flood defence can be incorporated within urban design. Again, it's not taking the concept design process very far. It was all about just getting investors interested and showing them what's possible. So to finish, this is the final slide that I was going to show you, and it really talks about how we could cluster and pull together the different opportunities around the Humber. There are big areas where really the focus is more on agricultural improvements and getting more capacity for attenuation into the floodplain. There are areas like the Ancon Valley, which I mentioned, but also Sunk Island, which Laura had mentioned at the beginning, and Spurn Head perhaps, and the Cleethorpes area, where nature tourism is very important, but where we need to actually pull people back from the estuary sometimes so as to keep the estuary for wildlife. There are other areas which are allocated very importantly for industrial development. How do we integrate these projects within that context? And we were able in the main report to pull all of these different themes and ideas together. But I think the main message coming out of this project is really about stakeholder engagement and the value of this landscape-led approach for doing that, for enabling very, very difficult decisions to be made and conversations to be started. It's a new approach, as Laura said, for the Environment Agency to do it this way, and it's demonstrated the value of landscape architects in helping to facilitate this type of approach. And I can see from the studies and the conversations that have happened since this project kicked off, that it is doing just that it has started that conversation, and that these types of maps and diagrams are being used by multiple different agencies, stakeholders, and other professionals. Thank you.